This is for the people that have an interest, the people that want to be involved.
There was no collusion at all.
This is for the people that are upset and looking for a place to use their voice.
Both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
This is for the people that want to make a difference, for the people that want to be on the right side of history.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
And I get it. In today's society, it's difficult to have a political opinion and to make it be known. This can be due to fear or because you feel like you don't understand what's going on.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
But if he can do it, so can you. Join me every Sunday on Backstories, where we'll discuss all the top political stories and how it applies to all of us. And trust me, this is not your everyday show on politics. Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome back to Backstories with Brandon Dais, and I am the host, Brandon Dais. Happy to be here, as always, to be giving you the latest in politics. So we're going to begin today's episode with reviewing the special prosecution that Robert Mueller is doing, looking into Trump-Russia collusion. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I want to begin this segment of updates on Robert Mueller's progress by clearing up some of the muddied waters with all of these different characters involved in the mafia-like scheme that is Trump-Russia collusion. So we all know that this man, Paul Manafort, was Donald Trump's 2016 campaign chairman and is now a convicted felon for several crimes. Paul Manafort is a central figure to Trump-Russia collusion because he was the highest-ranking official working for the Trump campaign and also because of his actions and close ties with several different Russians. The second individual you see is a Russian businessman named Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska is a Russian billionaire with a close relationship to the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. The third individual on the screen is Konstantin Kilimnik. Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian government intelligence asset or spy to some degree. Now, in my attempt to clarify the stories and connections between these individuals, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes versions of their stories, if you will. Before Paul Manafort became a criminal, he was an international political lobbyist, as well as a political strategist whose most recent work was located in Ukraine and Russia. In Paul Manafort's international dealings with Ukrainians and Russians, Paul Manafort found himself in a business deal with Oleg Deripaska that went sour, which resulted in Manafort owing Deripaska millions of dollars. Now enter Konstantin Kilimnik, who at that time was acting as a liaison between the Russian government and Trump's campaign, as well as being the go-between for Paul Manafort and Oleg Deripaska. Konstantin Kilimnik and Manafort also had an extensive history in the fact that Paul Manafort and Konstantin Kilimnik became close allies dating all the way back to 2005, as Konstantin Kilimnik had become an employee of Paul Manafort's political business. Emails and recent court filings revealed that Paul Manafort emailed a scheme to Konstantin Kilimnik during the 2016 election that detailed how he could use his position as Trump's campaign chairman to settle his debt with Oleg Deripaska. Quote, the next day, Manafort emailed Kilimnik a scheme as to how to use his role with Trump as a path to recovering his financial equilibrium. In documents turned over to Congress and Mueller and previously described to the Post, Manafort and Kilimnik exchanged gleeful emails about the positive press Manafort was receiving because of his new campaign role. In one, Manafort wrote to ask whether the OVD operation had seen the articles, an apparent reference to Deripaska adding, "How do we use this to get whole?" end quote. In addition to those emails, there were several different one-on-one meetings that occurred during the 2016 campaign between Paul Manafort and the Russian Konstantin Kilimnik. Presumably, there were several crimes committed in these meetings in the form of using a campaign and accepting gifts from a foreign power, but again, that is just me presumably speaking. What we can confirm, however, at this point in the game is that Paul Manafort handed over polling data during the 2016 election to Konstantin Kilimnik. Konstantin Kilimnik, being the Russian intelligence agent that he is and was one of the individuals involved in the wave of Russian fake news ads that occurred on Twitter and Facebook during the election. More importantly, those ads that the Russians made up and released in the United States were released with the intent of swinging more voters toward Donald Trump. And those ads were tailored to specific political issues identified in the polling data that Paul Manafort gave to Konstantin Kilimnik. So basically, in a nutshell, Paul Manafort handed over political polling data illegally to Konstantin Kilimnik, all to settle a debt that he has with Oleg Deripaska. And while I'm sure there are several other factors and people involved in this complicated scheme, including Donald Trump, that has yet to be proven. What we can prove with Manafort handing over this polling data to Konstantin Kilimnik is that collusion, in fact, did take place. Moving on, if you don't remember this gentleman, this is the former FBI Director James Comey. James Comey was terminated by Donald Trump in 2017 because James Comey went public with the news that there was an ongoing FBI investigation into Trump-Russia collusion. Now, while that may have occurred in 2017, James Comey's testimony from being the FBI Director remains relevant today in 2019. James Comey's termination remains relevant today because it led to the appointment of Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor now in charge of Trump-Russia collusion, as well as any other crimes that may have occurred and may have been committed by Trump and all of his minions. This is in addition to the fact that through his idiocy, Donald Trump has caused a new investigation to determine whether or not he committed obstruction of justice when he terminated James Comey. And there have certainly been even more news developments surrounding James Comey's termination. Quote, CNN has obtained a series of transcripts of closed-door meetings between members of Congress and FBI officials that reveal the FBI feared that Trump could have fired the Bureau's former director at the behest of the Russian government, end quote. And wow. So this would clearly make sense when you think about it. Considering that the dictator of Russia, being Vladimir Putin, he would of course order his employee, Donald Trump, to fire James Comey from being the FBI director because he doesn't want the FBI to know all of the methods and maneuvers that the Russians used to hack into the 2016 election. I mean, it only makes sense. Who would want the cops, what robbers would want the cops to catch them? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And you can couple that with the fact that if Trump did indeed terminate James Comey as the FBI director just to stop Trump-Russia collusion at the ordering of Vladimir Putin, not only did he just commit obstruction of justice, which is a felony to some degree, but this also implicates Trump as being a Russian asset, meaning he is an agent working for Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. So, this may sound extremely damning. However, I do want to point out that at the time that these transcripts were generated, the FBI were looking into two different possibilities. And to be fair, I want to tell you what those two possibilities were. The first possibility was that Donald Trump himself was completely innocent of all the collusion occurring with his campaign, and that any collusion that did occur was truly due to all of his employees, such as Paul Manafort and others, working with the Russians without his knowledge of it, which I personally find to not be very likely at all. Possibility number two is that, as the previous quote implied, Donald Trump did actively collude with Russia during the 2016 election, and he is still currently actively colluding with Russia now. So, but what's most shocking, in my opinion, about all of these transcripts is the fact that the United States Congress, which at this time when these transcripts were created, was controlled by Republicans. So they knew of the possibility that Donald Trump could be working for the Russian government. And they did absolutely nothing about it. They simply sat on it. At this point, there is no question at all that the Republican Party does not care about national security and does not care about this country at all. They are more interested in protecting themselves and protecting their party overall. Now, the most explosive news to develop relating to the special prosecution and Trump-Russia collusion came from BuzzFeed News. Quote, Donald Trump directed his longtime attorney, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, according to two federal law enforcement officials involved in an investigation of the matter, end quote. The political and legal consequences of this report is pretty damning, and that goes without saying. If Donald Trump did indeed counsel his lawyer, his personal lawyer that was testifying before Congress, if he told him to lie to Congress, not only did he commit a felony, because that's orchestrating a lie to Congress, and lying to Congress itself is also a felony, but it is considered a high crime, not only punishable by jail time for Mr. Trump, but also that will be a crime that will qualify Donald Trump for impeachment without question, without excuses, full stop. But the issue here now is that the special prosecutor Robert Mueller has already come out against this report, and he had his spokesman issue the following quote. Quote, BuzzFeed's description, of specific statements to the special counsel's office and characterization of documents and testimony obtained by his office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. Special counsel spokesman Peter Carr said in a statement obtained by The Hill on Friday night, end quote. The point of that quote is that the spokesman said that this article from BuzzFeed News was not accurate. He did not say that it was not true, which leads me to speculate that there were certain elements to the article that was true and that there were certain elements that were not. Because Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller has come out and said that this was not accurate, there have been several people all over the mainstream media that have been blasting BuzzFeed News, calling it not credible and saying that it is not real news. I do want to point out that BuzzFeed News was the news organization that produced a story about the Steele dossier, which was that British intelligence spy that completed this report that got the Trump-Russia collusion exposed and opened up the investigation. BuzzFeed News is who brought forth that story and broke it and gave it to all of us. And at that time, those same people that were calling BuzzFeed News not credible now were the same ones doing it back then. However, the Steele dossier was proven to be very true, pretty much all of it except for one point. And I just want to say that if BuzzFeed News was telling the truth then, I personally consider them to be telling the truth now, but however, I will allow you guys to formulate your own opinions regarding that matter. But the drama involving Michael Cohen, and of course, does not stop there. In an attempt to further influence the 2016 election, Michael Cohen paid money to rig two online polls just to show Donald Trump in a higher favor. And we know anything about favor and success. Donald Trump has no relationship with those two things at all, just as much as he does not have a relationship with the truth at all. And yes, Donald Trump knew that this was going on. He even offered his own personal funding to pay for these polls to be rigged. The first poll to be rigged was a January 2014 CNBC influential business leader poll. And even though they rigged that poll to have Donald Trump included in the influential business leaders, which he is not, he still lost, rightfully so, and did not make the poll, did not make the list. The second poll that was rigged was a Drudge Report poll that detailed the then Republican presidential candidates of 2016. The attempt to rig that poll was successful in that it got Trump listed as the top 5 candidates. I don't necessarily know if it was a rigging per se, but he was in the top 5 nonetheless. So, there have been no political implications or consequences that have been reported regarding this rigging to this point, but there are certainly going to be political and social consequences due to it. Trust me and believe me when I tell you. The last piece of news I like to report on regarding the special prosecution was yet another not so subtle and not so slick attempt for Donald Trump to try to conceal his collusion, active collusion, with Vladimir Putin in Russia. So it's been noted that Donald Trump has met with Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, at least 5 times, face to face, and the only people that were present for those meetings was Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and their 2 translators. So, this is very unprecedented because, which is to say that it has never happened before and it should have never taken place, because normally whenever world leaders meet, they bring their staff, they bring interpreters, they bring note takers, right? I mean, that's just to be understandably so that the country can know what's going on with their security, with their resources, what these 2 world leaders were talking about. However, since the Democrats have now been in the House of Representatives, have now announced that they're going to ramp up their investigations into Trump-Russia collusion, Donald Trump has now confiscated the notes that the one translator that was there to represent America was taking during those meetings with Putin. So, this is not very shocking to me that Donald Trump would do something like this. I mean, this is what children do when they know that they've done something wrong, or what a dog does when it does something wrong. Like when a dog bites up your shoe and then he'll hide the shoe, and then when you find that he did the shoe, the dog kind of like, bows his head and cowers down. This is something I expect Donald Trump to do. I mean, he is a dog. He is a child at heart. However, what's most important to remember about all of it is that this is Donald Trump actively trying to hide something yet again in plain sight, which is going to carry some legal and political burdens as well. Just as soon as Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, compiles all of his evidence and gives us the report that we need to get Donald Trump straight the hell out of here. So that's all I have to report on this matter for this time. Watch this space.
People love you and you win. And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I said, baby, they don't. Because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
Okay, everybody, so now it is time to report on the latest developments, if you will, on Trump's newest shutdown, the 3rd one to have begun in 2018. Recent polling shows that the American people, the majority of the American people, are placing blame on Donald Trump and the Republican thugs on Congress for this government shutdown, and rightfully so. An ABC News and Washington Post poll states the following, quote, "As you may know, the federal government has been partially shut down because Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress, as well as Democrats in Congress, cannot agree on laws about border security. Who do you think is mainly responsible for this situation?" 53% say Donald Trump and the Republican thugs in Congress. 29% say the Democrats in Congress, which is Donald Trump's measly, wimply base. And 13% say equal blame for both parties, end quote. A Quinnipiac poll found similar results. The GOP is losing the battle as 50% of American voters say that Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are responsible for the shutdown, while 36% say the Democrats are responsible, end quote. So, despite these abysmal polling numbers that Donald Trump is receiving in public opinion, Donald Trump continues to just march on, screaming his lies about immigrants being rapists, drug dealers, and murderers, which again are all lies. Let's talk about the actual and factual effects of Trump's 3rd government shutdown in 1 year. that are really hurting the American people that he claims to be protecting. First up is the fact that Donald Trump is the only individual to occupy the White House and have an entire month of their tenure dedicated to a government shutdown. Secondly, there are 9 out of 15 federal departments that are impacted by the shutdown, including the Department of Commerce, the Department of the Interior that handles the national parks, the Department of State that handles our passports and diplomatic affairs with other countries, the Department of Transportation, which handles airport security and other transportation needs, the Department of Agriculture that handles our food inspections, the Department of Justice that handles our criminal justice, the Department of Treasury, which handles the economy, as well as the Department of Housing and Urban Development that handles public housing. These 9 departments that are affected by the shutdown employ the 800,000 federal employees that include 380,000 furloughed employees that have been forced to leave work without pay, and 420,000 employees that are required to continue working without pay. And lastly is this gem. As of January 11th of 2019, Trump's shutdown has cost a negative $3.6 billion impact on our economy, as well as, and as of January 25th, Trump's shutdown will have a $7.1 billion negative impact on our economy, which will cost significantly more than the $5.7 billion that Trump is requesting for that wall that will not be happening. This is coupled with the fact that there have already been $13 billion that Trump has cost the economy with his trade tariffs, and the $2 trillion with a T, $2 trillion that Trump and the Republican thugs in Congress have added to our national debt with their irresponsible tax cuts. So much for economic conservatism and responsibility, right, Republicans? So, in true Trumpian fashion, Donald Trump gave a speech on Saturday, and he billed this speech as a major announcement, which ended up being nothing more than a major bunch of bullshit. Trump's Saturday speech of shame was nothing more than an attempt to divert the heat that he's receiving for the shutdown, to divert it from him and cast it onto the Democrats in Congress. Basically, what the speech ended up being was an announcement that he and the Republican thugs in the Senate have come up with a proposal that they plan to vote on this coming week in the Senate to end the government shutdown. Again, Trump's government shutdown. This proposal, I can guarantee you, however, will never receive or see, the light of day, because there will likely be next to no Democratic senators to vote yes on this bill, and the Democrats that are in charge of the House of Representatives have already announced that this proposal is already dead on arrival. However, let's just, for the hell of it, let's just review what Donald Trump's proposal included. This time, it's now $5.7 billion for a physical barrier in which Trump concedes will not be a concrete wall, but rather a bunch of steel poles. Okay. The Bridge Act, offering 3 additional years of temporary protections for DACA recipients, additional extensions of protection for other immigrants that possess temporary protection status, and additional drones, troops, judges, and other resources to handle immigration at the southern border. So what is hilarious to me, and I honestly found myself in hysterical laughter on the floor at the end of his speech, was the fact that he is now literally attempting to end his shutdown by asking for even more absurd requests than he did with the $5.6 billion he initially asked for. Now he wants $5.7 billion. Now he wants drones and more troops and judges, which are also going to cost a lot more money, which again is not going to happen. However, what was the funniest and most pathetic aspect of this speech was the fact that Trump finally admitted to himself and to his blind base of supporters that he will never, ever, 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 ever have a concrete wall that extends along the southern border. He is now saying that the wall will be transparent because it will just be a bunch of steel poles. I can assure you, however, that there will be no wall in any form, period, as long as the Democrats have something to say about it. And I'm hoping that the Democrats stand firm and stand strong on their stance regarding this issue, because Donald Trump is now in a weakened position. He is now finally starting to realize that elections have consequences, and he lost the House of Representatives, and this is his consequence. Speaking of Congress, I want to move on into the next segment, Moves and Countermoves, which is going to cover all of the latest actions that have occurred within Congress and not just specifically Donald Trump. Now, despite the government shutdown, there has surprisingly still been a lot of drama and a lot of action that have occurred in Congress throughout this past week. Let's start with the Democrats in Congress, since I am a left or liberal person, so I'm always going to give respect to the Democrats first. I reported a couple of weeks ago about this anti-corruption and voting rights bill that the Democrats passed up to the Senate on one of their first days of controlling the House of Representatives. I want to quickly review with you what this bill would do should it actually be made into a law. The bill would require super PACs, or political action committees, and dark money political organizations to make their donors public, meaning no more secret donors. It would set up a voluntary option to publicly finance campaigns powered by small donations. The federal government would provide a voluntary 6-to-1 match for candidates for president and for Congress, which means for every dollar a candidate raises from small donations, the federal government would match it 6 times over. The maximum small donation that could be matched would be capped off at $200. That sounds good too. The president and vice president and presidential/vice presidential candidates will be required to disclose 10 years of tax returns, like they have been doing for the past few decades. It would put in stricter lobbying registration requirements with more oversight of foreign agents. It would set up nonpartisan redistricting commissions to end partisan gerrymandering and create a new national automatic voter registration, asking voters to opt out rather than opt in. And it would make Election Day a holiday for federal employees and encourage private sector businesses to do the same. Now, to me, this just all sounds incredible. I mean, it's all a great thing. Who wouldn't want corruption and corrupt lobbyists in our government? Who wouldn't want to get them out of here? Who wouldn't want elections to be more fair by ending gerrymandering? Who wouldn't want to encourage voting amongst all of the people by having automatic registration, by giving people the day off so that they can go vote? I'll tell you exactly who doesn't want these things, and that is the Republican thugs in Congress, and more specifically, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. Quote, "From the First Amendment to your ballot box, Democrats want to rewrite the rules to favor themselves and their friends," McConnell concluded, end quote. Okay. Don't be surprised by McConnell and his ridiculous, just his blunt ignorance. This quote from him is just a throwback strategy that the Republicans have been using since their creation back in the Boston Tea Party nonsense. Instead of focusing on the issues and focusing on fairness and truly governing the American people, the Republicans rely on attacking the Democrats because they believe that it conveys strength. And this is why I indeed say that the Republican Party is a dying party, and it is an obsolete party that has no relevance and no place now or in the future. The next Democratic action to take place occurred in a meeting where Democratic lawyers that represent the Democrats in the House of Representatives met to evaluate whether or not they were going to subpoena those translator notes that Donald Trump confiscated from the translator present during the 5 times that he met with Putin. So, like I said earlier, Donald Trump confiscated those notes. However, just because he confiscated them doesn't mean shit when it comes to a federal government subpoena, in which he cannot confiscate or hide them. He would have to hand them over. The problem with issuing a subpoena for this notes is that it establishes a new precedent, and when we have another Democratic president in the future, if the Republicans are in charge of Congress, they can begin subpoenaing translator notes and other presidential protected material that has not ever been done before. It would also technically make diplomacy, face-to-face diplomacy with other world leaders, more complicated, according to Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives. I, however, personally side with the progressive Democrats, in other words, the more liberal Democrats in their views on this matter. Their view is that this is an issue of national security since Donald Trump has had these 5 meetings with Vladimir Putin and is refusing to tell anyone, including the people working for him, what was discussed. So I also want to point out that the presidency, much like any other position in Congress, is a public position. And the public deserves to know what the government is doing because that is how a democracy works. I mean, it's not rocket science. So, I want to move on now to the pettiness that came from both Democrats and Republicans and what I personally find to be embarrassing on both sides, on many sides, so to speak. Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi sent Donald Trump a letter where she told him that his State of the Union address, which is normally held in the House of Representative chamber, would be postponed to a later date after the government shutdown was over. In part, it read, quote, "On January 3rd, it was my privilege as the Speaker to invite you to deliver the State of the Union address on January 29th. The Constitution calls for the so-called president to, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the State of the Union. During the 19th century and up until the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, these annual State of the Union messages were delivered to Congress in writing. And since the start of modern budgeting in the fiscal year of 1977, the State of the Union address has never been delivered during a government shutdown." Good point, Nancy. Sadly, given the security concerns and unless government reopens this week, I suggest that we work together to determine another suitable date after government has reopened for this address or for you to consider delivering your State of the Union address in writing to Congress on January 29th, end quote. This was, of course, met with an even pettier move from the petty fangirl himself, Donald Trump. He wrote his own letter in response to Nancy, in which he said that he was not going to pay for her trip to visit the American troops in Afghanistan and to go engage in diplomacy in the United Nations in Brussels. So, this note or letter that he sent back to Nancy was, of course, smattered and sprinkled with all of his lies. He said that her trip was going to include a stop in Egypt and that it was going to be 7 days. That is not the truth. The truth is that her trip was only going to be 5 days, and it did not include a trip to Egypt. So, but we all know Donald Trump we know already that he does not have any affinity for the truth whatsoever. So, I mean, this is just a heap of bullshit, more bullshit from Donald Trump. So now we want to move on to what the Republican thugs in Congress were able to get done this week. So they were able to renew their campaign of attacking a former FBI official as a way to distract the American people from their views on the Trump-Russia collusion. Republican Representative Jim Jordan wrote a column where he accused a lawyer for the FBI of giving the Steele dossier to a journalist as a means to cultivate or start the Trump-Russia collusion investigation. This is not true. The entire article was a lie. It was a blatant fabrication. This is a Republican conspiracy theory and talking point as a way to conjure up some support from amongst their very small and very blind base of Republican supporters. They want to gain support to terminate Robert Mueller and to not take Robert Mueller's report on Donald Trump's collusion seriously. This, however, has failed for the past year now, but yet the Republicans persist. Up next, we'll cover the most ridiculous news stories to make it to headlines. I'll see you after the break.
As the former president of Mexico, I want to speak directly to you, the current president of the Electoral College of the United States, because we need to get something straight between our two countries. And it isn't going to be a fucking wall. No. Under no circumstances will we pay for this stupid, useless, racist monument. Mexico will not pay for the fucking wall.
When it comes to Republican Representative Steve King and his racist rhetoric, I cannot be bothered. Being the complete Neanderthal that he is, Republican Representative Steve King from Iowa went on his umpteenth racist rant where he questioned why being labeled a white supremacist was considered offensive in today's society. I cannot be bothered with this for a litany of reasons, and I mean, anyone can understand that, but I just want to give you a couple of them. The first reason I cannot be bothered with this is because Steve King is a Republican. Therefore, I expect this type of dated and archaic thought process to occur and to come from him. Because that's literally what the Republicans are all about, taking all of us as a country back to the first century. And furthermore, after offering a fraudulent apology, which he eventually did, stating that his comments were taken out of context, he denounced the discipline he received in the House of Representatives as a political move, which essentially nullifies the entire apology and shows that he was never apologetic to begin with. So why even waste everyone's time? When it comes to Republican Senator Ted Cruz being a complete and total national embarrassment, I cannot be bothered. Lacking any form of shame and discernment, Ted Cruz took his ass on national TV and said that no one in the country is concerned with Russia or Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller at all. I cannot be bothered with this solely because it's Ted Cruz and there is literally no other reason needed for me not to be bothered with it. I mean, literally, when it comes to Ted Cruz, you get one of two things whenever he opens his mouth. Either it's something that's a blatant lie or something that is blatantly stupid. That's it. Republican Senator Rand Paul as the new face of Republican hypocrisy? I definitely cannot be bothered. In their fights against universal health care and the Affordable Care Act, Republicans like Rand Paul stated that Democrats were trying to make our health care in America like Canada's, which is supposedly riddled, with long lines and poor health care, according to the Republicans. One of the Republicans screaming that lie the loudest and the most frequent was Republican Senator Rand Paul. Well, now ironically, that Kentucky senator finds himself in Canada having hernia surgery. And I'm assuming he's having this surgery now after having waited in the long imaginary line that he lied to the American people about. I cannot be bothered with this because it is another piece of the unlimited amount of evidence that we have to show that the Republicans are willing to sell any and everything, including their integrity, to have some form of influence and to sell their lies to the American people. Trump and his failed attempt to illegally withhold money from Puerto Rico, I cannot be bothered. So it has now been discovered that Donald Trump has illegally been attempting to withhold money from Puerto Rico, money that was allocated to Puerto Rico to rebuild after Hurricane Maria. I cannot be bothered with this because it is yet another loss in the never-ending Donald Trump losing streak. And this action serves to show that Donald Trump's corruption has no limits and no bounds. Lastly, when it comes to the sudden epiphany that Donald Trump possesses the political acumen of a child in their terrible twos, I cannot be bothered. This was a quote from a headline at The Independent, which is a British news source. Quote, "It should come as no surprise, and it has not, that he is sorely lacking in sophistication, true, knowledge of the world, definitely true, and understanding of government, and a rudimentary grasp of economics." I've said that several times, end quote. I cannot be bothered with this headline because this is not some new groundbreaking discovery that Donald Trump's an idiot. This is literally something that we've all known for a number of years. And you can couple that with the fact that Donald Trump is literally the sole reason that the United States as a country is the laughingstock on the world stage at this time. I'll come to conclude after the break.
People have come to see the wizard, and the wizard has promised them the Great Wall of Trump, paid for by the Mexicans. But at the moment, for the unveiling of the wall, it appears to be an invisible one. And where are the pesos? Where are the Mexican pesos that the American people were promised would pay for this wall? There are no pesos. And so now a man who demagogued this issue from the first hour, coming down the escalator, is being held to account. And so we're going to watch this farce play out tonight, and it will be a historic occasion because there has never been a president who has appeared from the Oval Office of the White House for the express and explicit purposes of gaslighting the American people about 100% pure grade BS.
So now it's time for our come to conclude, and I'll just start the question with, isn't America supposed to be the land of freedom and the land of choices? Well, why is it now that in 2019 we still have people invested in the birth choices of women? On January 13th, 2019, a federal judge had to slap down yet another attempt by Donald Trump to allow employers to refuse contraceptive coverage to women if they have a religious or moral reason to do so. And believe me, when I tell you that Donald Trump only made this move to keep the phony, radical, holier-than-thou Christians at his beck and call. While I am inherently myself against abortion, I understand that as a man, I cannot dictate what a woman does and does not do with her body. It is her choice. And I say that to you with the same authority as when I say I am a strong advocate for any contraceptive means that will prevent an abortion. My point is if America is supposed to be the land of freedom, why is there still all this fighting over an issue that essentially boils down to a woman's right to choose? A choice, literally. A woman that often has nothing to do with the people that are trying to make the choices for her. We have these issues due to the people on the right, those conservative Republicans. And those are the people on the right side of the political spectrum. Also, if America is supposedly this great place of opportunity with liberty and justice for all, why has the United States Supreme Court allowed South Dakota to proceed with its sentencing of a man to death simply because he's gay? Quote, some of the jurors who imposed the death penalty on Charles Rines, who was convicted of murder, have said they thought the alternative, a life sentence served in a men's prison, was something that he would enjoy as a gay man, end quote. I am not arguing that this man should not suffer the due punishment for committing the murder that he did, but to deny this man the option of a life sentence in prison, which is something that is offered to thousands of other prisoners, they want to put him to death simply because he's gay, and that reveals just how ugly Lady Liberty can really be. And why would South Dakota even entertain this sentence of death at all? They are entertaining it because South Dakota is a deep red Republican state, and it is full of the same conservative hate and discrimination that has been teeming within the Republican Party since its creation. I don't mean to attack the United States as an entire country, because I do believe and stand by the values and the morals that it is supposed to be all about. However, America will never be great until the people that are fighting to stop it from being great are removed from power. The people that are stopping America from being great are the same people that are all about making America great again, the Republican Party. You cannot make a country great by claiming you're all about equality and diversity and freedom, while you're also marginalizing and attempting to eradicate certain groups of people. It's hypocritical and it's contradictory. Now, the Republicans are quick and frequently out and about shouting and screaming how the Democrats don't care about the American people or American values. But let the record show. Let these two examples be added to the record and show how Since America's founding days, it has been the Republicans that have single-handedly been holding America back from being great. That's all I have got for you for this week's episode. Please like, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, if you didn't know already, Backstories is available on YouTube and podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and Spotify. All the information can be found on my website at backstories-us.com. Thank you all for joining me this week. I had a lot of fun putting this show together, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of Backstories, which will not be your everyday show on politics.